All right, hello everybody. Obviously, if you're getting this, I think I warned you guys I'm not going to be here today, but it is very, 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 very important that you are following along with the lecture here and filling in and really listening to what I'm saying in terms of the lecture. Really, it's no different as if I was really in the classroom, which is the beauty about doing these things. I will be back tomorrow. So what you're going to need is you're going to need your guided notes. You're going to look at the section, I know it's kind of hard for you guys to see on this. I don't know if you even can. There's a section that says War Ends. See here, match it up. Towards the bottom of this, I think the second page, I think it is, and you'll see it on top of the slide, War Ends, so it shouldn't be very hard to find. This lecture won't take super long, so make sure you're listening to this, you're copying on the notes, you're absorbing what I'm going over, and then you'll have time to work on your study guide, as I'll show you here in a little bit. All right, so here's some important things. Now, obviously, it's really kind of important for you guys to understand that really a year after the United States enters the war is over. I know we talked about this, but for 3 years of fighting, guys, 3 years of fighting, America was not involved, and the French, the British, the Germans, who fought trench warfare for 3 years, it began to wear on them. Think about it like a football game. You play for 3 quarters. It's a close game. You're hitting. You're bloody. You're tired. You're kind of just trying to get by. And all of a sudden, America enters the war, and they're fresh. These troops have not fought in trenches for 3 years. They're fresh on the scene. They're bringing in millions of soldiers and men, and on top of that, you're bringing in the industrial might and the factory systems and the weapons, the weaponry that we have to offer to the Allies. That's that's a game changer. So ultimately, long story short, the war is going to end on November 11th, 1918. This is where World War One comes to an end. Now think about what holiday do we celebrate on that day? Veterans Day. The 11th month at the 11th hour, World War One comes to an end, which is why we celebrate Veterans Day on that day. That really kind of commemorates the end of the end of the big war. So the big four. When a war ends, you need to have a treaty, right? So the big four. Now, who's the big four? You have the Allied powers. Who won? So you have France. Their president is there. Then you have Great Britain. Their president is there. Then you have the United States. Woodrow Wilson is there. And then you have Italy is there. Now, there were other countries there too who are part of the Allied powers, like, for instance, Japan. And we'll come back to Japan in a little bit. But there were other countries there too who are part of the Allied side. But really, the big four, and I really may even say, and I say the big four loosely, it was really the big three that really ran the meeting. The big three being France, Britain, United States. Italy was kind of shunned a little bit because technically they signed a deal way back in the 1880s with Germany and with Austria-Hungary. So technically when the war started, although militarily they weren't involved in the war, they were on the side of Germany and Austria-Hungary. And then in 1915, Great Britain and France promised Italy some land, and they ended up flipping sides, coming to their side. So I guess France and Great Britain and the Americans, they never really seen them as like, a true part of their alliance. So anyway, here's the deal. When the big four went to this meeting, everybody had different needs and wants. They had a different vision. So for how they wanted the war to end and what terms of the treaty they wanted to see. As you'll see here in a minute, some of these countries wanted to absolutely hammer Germany and punish them and cripple them. While other countries were saying, hey, let's pump the brakes, let's be careful. We don't want to have a treaty that can eventually cause bitterness and could eventually lead to another war later down the road. So you kind of had to balance all of these different visions for what the big four wanted. So again, really quick, you have Georges Clemenceau. And you guys got notes. I know it's kind of vague here, but to identify the leaders. So you need to write this down. Georges Clemenceau, leader of France. Now, again, write this down as well. What did he want? He wanted to inflict severe punishment on Germany. He wanted to weaken Germany. And it goes back to a lot of the history. France has fought against Germany well before World War One. Germany invaded them, and they share a border with Germany. So um, naturally, France, because the war was fought in France, naturally, France, their economy and their land was devastated, and they blamed Germany for it. So they wanted Germany to pay for the war and pay them back, as we'll get to in here in a little bit. Then you had Woodrow Wilson was like, hey, wait, let's pump the brakes a little bit. He he created a 14-point plan. Again, that's a bold term. You need to know that. Bold it, underline it, do what you got to do. But that was our president's plan was a 14-point plan. These were 14 points for peace. 14 things that the world needs to do to have peace. So again, I have it down here. Again, you need to write this down in that section. Use margin space, whatever you got to do. But here again, I'm not having you guys understand, and I'm not going to have you guys know all 14 points. But ultimately, here was the main things of it. He believed that every country should reduce weapons after World War One. The thing about how that was different. Oops, about that. So he believed that all countries should reduce weapons. Think about how different from that was from before World War One. Everybody was increasing them. So he said that was really a cause for why the war happened. He also believed it was a right of the people to choose their own government, something called self-determination. That is very, 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 very important. So remember the whole thing. That whole started with Bosnia, Serbia. This Bosnian Serbs Gavrilo Princip shot and killed Archduke because he wanted to be a part of Serbia. Well, all these little tiny ethnic groups, they wanted their independence, and they were nationalistic. A part of the deal was that Wilson believed that we need to give independence to like the Polish and the Ukrainians and the Serbians and all these little countries that should self-determine their own futures. That's very important, and I'll talk about why in a little bit. And then lastly, he wanted to create the League of Nations. He wanted to basically create an alliance, essentially, of countries to oversee the world, to maintain peace. Again, keep that in mind, very important. Write that down. Key term, boom, boom, League of Nations. And then you had David Lloyd George. He was the leader of Great Britain. He was going to mix between Clemenceau and Wilson. He wanted to punish Germany, but did not want to hammer them as severely because he was afraid of punishment, how that could lead to another war. And then you had Orlando, which was the Italian leader. All he wanted was land. They wanted land that was promised to them in 1915. France and Britain promised them, if you join our side and you open up a southern front where Germany has to fight down south, we'll promise you certain pieces of land. So let's go on to the next thing. So there's the terms of the treaty. This is what they came up with. So again, that's all what they wanted. Now here's what they actually agreed upon. Think of this term as called BRAT, B-A-R-T. This will help you in terms of understanding what the terms were. So basically, they put B for blame. Germany was blamed. They had to sign like a doctrine saying that they were the blame for the war. So they had to sign something called the War Guilt Clause. Excuse me. So think about that. The whole world is pointing the finger at you. Think about how that could be some repercussions later on, and how that could lead some bitterness and embarrassment amongst the Germans. Then you have R in BRAT, stands for reparations. Germany had to pay tens of billions of dollars to France and Great Britain for causing the war. So they basically had to pay for all the damage and everything because they attacked them. So think about that in terms of how that can cause some bitterness with Germany. Guys, by the way, they won't finish off paying the debt until 2009. So it'll take them almost 100 years to pay off this debt, and that is going to cripple the German economy. And again, we'll talk about that kind of as we go into the interwar years, so kind of keep that in mind. And then you have the A in BRAT, is Army. Germany's army was reduced. They were not allowed to have an air force. They had to reduce their navy, and they were only allowed to have 100,000 men in the army. Again, why? This was something France really wanted. Again, France wanted to hammer Germany, and that's what this treaty does. It hammers them. They were afraid of Germany attacking them again, so they wanted to make sure that the military was weak, that they were weak economically, which is why they had to pay back all the war debt. And then lastly, in BRAT is territory. Germany lost a lot of territory. They lost Poland. They lost colonies all over the world to France and Russia. And then here's the big thing, too. They were not allowed to be aligned with Austria-Hungary anymore. So that was the kicker. Now, obviously, you guys see this. This treaty was devastating to the German economy and to Germany overall. Again, it's something that France really wanted. Now, you got to understand, in terms of going back to the first slide here, the United States, sure, there were some things that they did agree upon. That was a part of Wilson's 14 points. So the League of Nations will be created. The problem is America was only in the war for a year. You have France and Britain that were in the war, and for all 4 years, and they're the ones who fought in the trenches for 4 years. Their lands were destroyed, their economy was destroyed, their cities were destroyed. So ultimately, France won out. They had a very bitter treaty that they wanted, and America didn't think that was the best idea. But ultimately, our president was kind of in a tough spot because we didn't really fight for all 4 years. So France had a lot more bargaining chips on the table. So here's some things, some impacts. It's not really in your notes, but please follow along with this. So human cost. 50 million soldiers and civilians were killed over the course of this battle. That 4 years. The influenza was also the first pandemic, not to say first pandemic, but there's a pandemic as well, kind of what we're experiencing now. It's the Spanish flu that killed over 50 million people as well. So between the cost of World War I life and plus the Spanish flu, you're talking about upwards of 80 to 100 million people dead, which is staggering numbers. Two was the economic costs that this war took its toll on. This war is going to destroy the economies of Europe. Europe lost its role as a dominant region in the world. Really, there are only a few countries that really benefited from the war, and that was the United States and Japan, because the war was not fought on their soils, and a lot of Europe was buying U.S. and Japanese products. So this is kind of where Europe kind of loses its, I guess, prestige. I guess their power rankings, I guess you can call it. So countries that needed to be rebuilt cost a lot of money. France, Belgium, Russia was devastated. Plus the loss of life too. You're losing a lot of workers, losing a lot of taxpayer base. I hate thinking of it that way, but the U.S. and Japan prospered out of this. Wink, wink. Keep that in mind. U.S. and Japan are going to prosper because of this, and Europe's going to lose its rank in the world. And then there's political costs. A lot of the old empires broke apart. The Ottoman Empire, which is a part of Austria-Hungary and the German alliance, they were broken up into different countries. Austria-Hungary was broken up. Germany was no longer to be in alliance with Austria-Hungary, and Austria-Hungary that was once one, now they're apart. And new countries are going to form, as you guys see here. So you see here's before. German Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, Russia. Now look what happens after. Poland is created. East Prussia, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Yugoslavia, Romania, Bulgaria are going to be created. Turkey down here is going to create. So again, go back to before and go back to the after. So again, going back to that whole self-determination thing. Now, important for you to understand this, Italy is going to be upset at this treaty. They did not get the lands that were promised to them by Britain and France. They felt tricked and betrayed. Keep that in mind. We'll come back to that. But ultimately, why? Because they wanted this land up here into Austria-Hungary, which they got some of it, but they also wanted some land over here as well, which they did not get. Now, why? Woodrow Wilson's self-determination. He wanted these small ethnic groups to have their own country, and basically what they said to Italy is like, sorry, but it's not our land to give. It's these ethnic groups. They have the right to self-determine what their country's going to go. So Italy left the treaty very bitter and very upset. You also have the Soviet Union is going to leave the meeting very bitter and upset. Why? They fought for the Allies for 3 years. They had an Eastern Front, millions of lives lost, lands destroyed, economy crippled, and look what happened to them. They weren't even invited to the Treaty of Versailles. And also look what happened. They lost some land too. They lost all this. They lost sections of Poland. They lost all this Latvia, Estonia, that once belonged to them. Now is being, again, self-determination. Ethnic groups wanting their independence. Germany's going to lose land as well. Germany, they're not even going to be invited to the Treaty of Versailles. So they're going to be bitter, basically like, hey, we had no say-so. We had nothing in terms of involvement. So anyway, what you're going to do now is you're going to go into Google Classroom, and you guys are going to complete this study guide, as you guys see right here. All right, adios. We'll see you tomorrow.